On today's show, Stephen Silas is out as the head coach of the Houston Rockets. Why was it finally time for the Houston Rockets to move on from Stephen Silas? What did he do well in his time in Houston? What did he struggle with? And who are some of the head coaches on the market that the Houston Rockets will be taking a look at this offseason? All of that and more coming up right here at Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Next game, how about Karl Anthony Towns to score more than 26.5 points? What about LeBron James to have more than 7.5 rebounds? How about Kevin Durant to have less than 6.5 assists? Or maybe even Steph Curry to have more than 3.5 three-pointers made? So what is Prize Picks? It's daily fantasy sports, but how does it work? Basically, you pick 2 to 6 players. If they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 25 times back on your money on any entry that you submit. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you watch. That's NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL, PGA. They've got you covered for all the action over at Prize Picks. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that simple. They're safe. They offer fast withdrawals. Currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. So download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. So don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. And now it's me, Jackson Gatlin, host of Locked On Rockets. You can follow wherever you listen to your podcasts and on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets to break down why the Houston Rockets have decided to finally move on from head coach Stephen Silas, why he will not be back coaching the team next season. And first off, you could just look at the win-loss record. It hasn't been great. The Rockets have been the worst team in the NBA 2 years in a row, and then this year they're going to finish as the tied for second worst team in the NBA with the San Antonio Spurs. But even looking past the win-loss record with Stephen Silas, there was never an expectation of him to get wins with this team, right? He walked into a situation when he was first hired in Houston where he thought he was going to be coaching James Harden, Russell Westbrook, and have kind of this ready-made contender to go to war with, and then he had that swept out from underneath him, right? And he was thrown face first into a rebuild that he wasn't expecting, and that the Rockets maybe were sort of expecting at the time, given that James Harden kind of had 1 foot in, 1 foot out the door. But unfortunately, while he was dealt a pretty bad hand of cards when he became the Houston Rockets head coach, he also didn't do very much with the hand that he was ultimately dealt. You can look at how he has navigated these last 3 years, and there are a lot of concerns, a lot of question marks about how he was, or whether he was able to really get the most out of the players on his roster. It feels like he has this very predetermined idea or like basketball philosophy of how the game should be played, and never really matched his approach to the game to the personnel that he had on hand. He has this vision for how he likes to run offense, which is this, free-flowing, read and react, minimal structure. And that sounds great in theory, but when you're running a group of 19, 20, and 21-year-olds, and you've got a starting lineup that is younger than some collegiate teams, you need more structure. You need to be a bit more heavy-handed with your coaching to get the best out of your players. So when you look at what Stephen Silas did well versus what he struggled with, it's really hard to point to any one thing that he actually did well over his 3 years in Houston. There's really nothing that I can concretely point to and say, yes, he did this incredibly well, and he should return as a head coach, or he should get another shot, another season as the head coach because of these reasons, right? And he got a lot of chances. The very first year that he was the head coach, you ball that year up and you throw it out because that was the transitional year. James Harden demands a trade 9 games into the season. You're pivoting mid-season from contending to rebuilding. You don't count that year. And then his second year was Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun. It was their rookie year. So you still don't even count that year. This season, this past season, these last 82 games was supposed to be the year where not even judging based off win-loss record, but you were supposed to be able to see something a bit more concrete with Stephen Silas of, okay, he's good at this, or he's really employing this type of offensive identity or culture or hierarchy, and there's none of that, unfortunately. The Rockets look like a mess pretty consistently on both ends of the floor, and some of that is because they are a young team, but some of that, and a lot of it actually, falls on the coaching staff and just the lack of structure, the lack of ability to employ defensive schemes that work for this group. There's just top to bottom issues for this organization, and coaching is a big part of it, unfortunately. So is Stephen Silas a victim of the Houston Rockets rebuild? This is a narrative that seems to be beginning to follow Stephen Silas a little bit. Some national media pundits have brought up the idea that Stephen Silas, he's a good guy, and he was, dealt a bad hand, and this was a bad opportunity. Yes, absolutely to all of that. Stephen Silas was not given the best environment to succeed in as a head coach, unfortunately. But sometimes that's also just life in the NBA, right? Sometimes you're given a hand, you're dealt a hand of cards, and you have to do your best to make the most of it. And that's where we go back to it hasn't coalesced at any point over these last 3 years where you've walked away from, a stretch of games where you've thought, man, he's really got something going here, right? He started last season 1-15. And again, this is not even just the win-loss record is one thing, but a team that comes out and starts the season 1-15, and then again to mimic that this year, going 2-15 to start the season. Yes, you look past the win-loss record to a certain extent, but there is something about the way that this Rockets team, the past couple seasons, and really the whole 3-year tenure under Stephen Silas, just hasn't ever really had an identity. Right? At no point have you been able to point to anything and say, yes, this is the staple of a Stephen Silas led team. They are really good at this, or they bring this to the table, or this is what they're elite at. They might struggle in some other areas, but this is the one thing that they can do incredibly well. There wasn't any of that. So in 3 years of being the head coach, hasn't been able to establish an identity, hasn't really been able to hold players accountable, demanding, a certain standard of play. And it is really tough when you've got such a young group. But ultimately, with this situation with Stephen Silas for the Houston Rockets, it was long overdue. It felt like something that probably would have happened much earlier in the season had it not been for the passing of Stephen Silas's father, Paul Silas, which feels kind of callous to say, but it's just a fact of the matter that when his father passed and the Rockets were going through a really rough stretch in December, there was a lot of talk heating up about whether the Rockets would move on from Stephen Silas at the midseason point and promote one of their assistant coaches, either John Lucas or Mahmoud Abdel-Fattah, and have one of them run the show until the end of the season and then figure out their next head coach from there. But after the passing of Paul Silas, it probably just felt like a situation that would have been, the Rockets would have gotten flamed if they had canned their head coach immediately after he lost his father, who was an NBA legend and an NBA coach himself in his own right. So at that point, organizationally, they were likely just resigned to the idea of he's going to play out the rest of the year. They were planning to be a bottom team anyways, again, to secure another top draft pick. That wound up working out in their favor. Whether they missed out on some of the day-to-day, the micro situations of maximizing developmental time for guys like Jalen Green and Alperen Şengün and Jabari Smith Jr., sure. Those guys definitely probably struggled these past couple of years, and in the hands of a better coach, they might have started blossoming a little bit quicker and might have started showing some upside a little bit sooner. Stephen Silas was on record as saying that he wasn't drawing up any plays for Jabari Smith Jr. at one point this season. So not drawing plays for the 3rd overall pick in the draft is a pretty damning statement, unfortunately. So maybe things would have looked a little bit better in Houston had they had a different coach. But at the end of the day, the big picture, the macro view for things in Houston, they're getting about as clean of a reset point as you can hope for as an organization. They'll have the opportunity to hire a new head coach with many names on the market currently linked to the Houston Rockets. Nick Nurse, Kenny Atkinson, Ime Udoka, a handful of names past those of guys who could be in the running for the Houston Rockets head coaching position. They project to have upwards of $60 million in cap space this offseason to play around with. They've got a young, exciting core of players, and they've recouped some of their draft assets, and they have about 7 to 8 first-round draft picks over the next 5 or 6 years. So they are in about as good a position as any team in the NBA to make a big splash this offseason, and they have to nail the head coaching hire, though, because the Rockets have basically become a bit of a laughingstock across the NBA landscape over these last 2 to 3 years. And the first domino that has to fall, the first step in the right direction to getting this Houston Rockets organization back to a place of legitimacy in the NBA landscape, is bringing in a coach with some pedigree. They cannot bring in another rookie head coach. They can't bring in somebody that doesn't have coaching experience. They need somebody with some pedigree to come in and give some credibility to this organization in the worst way possible. So a Nick Nurse, an Ime Udoka, a Kenny Atkinson, any of those types of names would do wonders for this Houston Rockets organization. How will the Houston Rockets look in the post-Stephen Silas era? Who will be their next head coach? I'll have you covered for all of that and more over at Locked On Rockets.